transition team and the first nominations and appointees of President Donald Trump and his team. And then, of course, we're also going to be looking to what happens after everybody's in place after January 20th. What comes next? Because we want a lot of movement. There's going to be a deadline, right, where they're going to try to stop everything. But let's just jump in right now. On the transition team, we've got Howard Lutnick. I heard his speech, and he was absolutely brilliant. I think he was in New York, and his speech was fabulous. And then I don't know really, Linda McMahon. Do you have anything to tell us about the transition team? How big is it beyond these two people, and
Sure.
what that's like?
Yeah, no, happy to try to provide some insight. And by the way, I have the, I think, unique honor of the fact that I've worked for both of them, the heads of the transition, outside of this effort. I worked for Howard Lutnick. That was my last Wall Street job. I was the chief strategist for BGC Partners, which is the sister firm of Cantor Fitzgerald. So most people identify him as Cantor Fitzgerald. That's the better known firm. But he also heads up BGC Partners. And as I said, they're really sister organizations. In some ways, they're actually kind of seamless. So I worked for Howard, know him very well. Got to speak to him recently, right before the election, at the Al Smith dinner, which is the big Catholic fundraiser in New York that, of course, Kamala Harris decided to skip. And we were actually thrilled that she skipped it because that snub was noticed by a lot of important people. And Howard Lutnick was there, and he and I got a chance to talk. And of course, we talked about transition in the hopes that we would win. I don't think both of us expected to win. Neither of us expected to win quite to this degree that we did. But he brings a lot of managerial skills, somebody who has built a massive and successful company, a company that he raised up literally from the ashes of 9/11, a company that was almost completely destroyed, and restored it to something that is bigger and more valuable than it ever was even before that tragedy. So he brings a ton of business acumen. And then Linda McMahon, I worked for at President Trump's PAC when President Trump was in office for the first term. She was the head of his outside group, Political Action Committee. And so I worked for her there. And of course, she also brings not just political skills and political experience, but also her tremendous entrepreneurial skill of building a huge, media and sports empire. So they're well positioned, of course. And, you mentioned Susie Wiles. What I'll say about Susie Wiles and why I think she's going to be a really effective chief of staff. She led an incredible campaign that was very focused, very disciplined, succeeded with far fewer resources than the opposition, meaning Kamala Harris had way more money, which is typically the case because the Democrats are the party of big business and of many of the oligarchs. However, she ran such a disciplined, streamlined campaign that I think she deserves the honor of this position of chief of staff. And I would also say this, that she really is one of the principal players in transforming the state of Florida broadly, not just this election, but broadly into such a ruby red state. Remember, Florida used to be the battleground state that we all sort of sweated over, right, into every election. It is not that way at all anymore. A lot of credit goes to President Trump. A lot goes to Ron DeSantis. A lot goes to Susie Wiles, who's been such a skilled operative and strategist in Florida. So I think she's going to bring that same mentality to Washington, D.C. And she's also, and this is really important, Elizabeth, she's a rarity in politics because she's somebody who doesn't need the credit. She doesn't need to have her name in the paper. As a matter of fact, doesn't like that, doesn't need to be on the television screen promoting herself. She's a key strategist and architect behind the scenes and willing to let the principal, in this case, President Trump, get the credit, even if she's responsible for a lot of what's going on behind closed doors.
She looks like she's all business.
Yes. Yeah. And I think, by the way, that's also important. I think President Trump really respects her. And that's a big deal, right? That I think he will take admonishment when necessary, in private, of course, from her. And so I think that's incredibly important. She's clearly a no-nonsense person. So between the transition team, between the incoming leadership over the White House team, which is quickly forming, and by the way, I think that's a big deal, how quickly this is happening. Very, very different from 2016. Remember, and by the way, I mean, I think, there are valid excuses, valid explanations and reasons why things weren't seamless then. A lot of people in Trump world didn't necessarily think he could win back then. He certainly did, but a lot of people around him did not. Of course, he was coming in from the private sector with zero political experience, almost zero experience in Washington, D.C. So there were things that were not streamlined at all, to say the least. There were things that took too long. Very, very different approach this time, though. Very different. It's something that serious people have been thinking about and planning for not just the short term, but in fact for years. And so I think that's part of why you're seeing the pace of these announcements to be far more intense than it was last time. But not just the pace and the frequency, but also the quality.
The quality.
fantastic people being named.
These have been, you can tell that these last 4 years that a lot of lessons were learned from the first term of the Trump White House, and this is what I think always concerns people: are lessons learned? Because mistakes were made, and very naturally so, because as you said, he was new to politics, and there were so many apparatchik type people in that first administration because he's taking advice from people that he thinks he can trust and rely upon their wisdom and their advice, and that was often not the case.
Right. Exactly. And in that first transition after he won that magnificent victory in 2016, think of two of the principal players in transition, Anthony Scaramucci and Chris Christie. Okay, two people who Donald Trump at the time, unfortunately, did place trust in, but two people who clearly do not share the America First vision at all, particularly in the case of Scaramucci, somebody who is completely turned, and somebody who is just a political chameleon apparently now without any real spine or sort of political soul, and is now beloved by MSNBC. But again, I don't want to harp too much on mistakes of the past. Let's talk about
No,
the
no,
success
no.
of the
Agreed,
present.
agreed.
Yeah.
Just seeing that it is extraordinary, the verve, the energy, and the
Yes.
precision, and the moment you just start trying to digest what just happened, you're not even finished with that, and you're already on to the next surprise. MSNBC, CNN, AB, they are all going bananas. Let's talk about some of these choices. So first, I would say is Pete Hegseth.
Yeah.
What do you have to tell me about your
I just
opinion about Pete Hegseth?
absolute A-plus pick. Pete is somebody who I've had the pleasure of interacting with quite a lot over the years because I've done a lot of Fox and Friends, especially on the weekends. I used to be a Fox News contributor. So I just think the world of him. And by the way, speaking of his Fox News experience, that's been roundly criticized by those on the political left as if that's somehow immaterial. Well, it's very important to be a good leader in today's world, to be good at communication and to be good at mass communication, especially via television. But of course, he's much more than only a TV personality. This is a guy with 2 Ivy League degrees who went to Princeton and went to Harvard, but somebody who's not just an intellect, but somebody who is a true tough warrior, somebody who served in combat, who earned a lot of medals and commendations for his heroism on behalf of our country, fighting in faraway lands. So he combines the intellect with the physical prowess, the bravery, the toughness. And he's somebody who has been consistently worried about the woke nonsense, the woke toxic propaganda that in far too many ways is infecting the United States military at the expense of real readiness. And so I think he's the absolute perfect pick. Now, he doesn't come from the foreign policy establishment of Washington, D.C., which I view as a positive, but that means that the very spokesman of that foreign policy establishment are up in arms, and they are screaming and pulling their hair out about it, which, Elizabeth, is probably a pretty good sign that Pete Hegseth was exactly the kind of pick we needed for that post.
It's so beautiful. And what I also notice about Pete is that he has the courage of his convictions. Fear not, be not afraid, says the Lord. Be of good courage. And he's the kind of man who's not going to be just tough on the battlefield and be a leader, which you need to have to be tough on the battlefield. But also, he's going to stand for what's true and right. And he's not going to back down because he's fearful. He's got that courage of his convictions.
Yeah. And, when you talk to people who are in the military right now, a lot of them are frankly demoralized because of what's been done to them over the last several years. For example, we had a lot of heroic fighters who were forced out because they didn't want to take a shot, a Fauci injection that they didn't want or need for a disease that was not a material threat to them. On top of that, I mentioned this woke propaganda, this nonsense, to have somebody, for example, like General Milley, who was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, somebody who's supposed to be the tip of the spear of the lethality of the American armed forces, going to Capitol Hill and talking about white rage. This is just, it's an absurdity. There's a politicized brass at the very top of the military that unfortunately is really not worthy of commanding the super brave men and women who have to answer to them. And I think President Trump and Pete Hegseth are going to change that. they are going to make sure that the top echelons of the military are not politicized, that they are not woke warriors, that they are lethal American warriors, people who will be feared and respected by the adversaries of the United States. It's that way through almost all of American history. This is a relatively recent and really unfortunate trend to see this leftward shift, and really not even a shift, it's a leftward lurch among the top ranks of our military. And we're going to correct that. I believe that President Trump and Pete Hegseth are going to correct that. And we need to, because not only are we mistreating brave people who risk their lives for us, that's a reason enough. But, Elizabeth, an even more important reason is, look, we have really dangerous adversaries in the world, in Moscow, in Tehran, in Beijing. I think when they look at some of the tactics and antics of the U.S. military lately, they are probably laughing at the U.S. military, and they need to be fearful of our military. That's what we have to get back to.
Steve, when the military, when you talk about the scoffing, the mocking of our military, this is a national security concern. This is a readiness concern. There's so many spokes, coming out from this hub of who is our military? Are we foreboding? Do people fear our military? Because how can you have peace through strength if you are mocked, and if they see that we have lost the very last shred of our foundational principles, not knowing the difference between men and women?
Right.
It's like you can't go much more bottom than that. And
Right.
I don't think that they can possibly fear us. I think they're fearing us now because they're going to see a great change. And I look forward to everything Pete does. Do you think we should talk about the process of advice and consent out of the Senate. Do you think that they're going to be able to do this before in a recess appointment? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, listen, it's certainly possible, but I think unlikely. But I don't say that with great confidence either. I really don't know. I'm basically undecided. The thing about recess appointments is there is political risk to that, right? If you use the mechanism of recess appointments, and there is clearly precedent to do so, it's a constitutional operation. However, if you do that in an intentional way, in other words, the only point of the recess is so that you can do recess appointments, you have really antagonized the U.S. Senate. And, to some degree, rightfully so. The senators take their role very seriously. They take their power and their rights as senators very seriously. And, of course, the Constitution is pretty clear that they do get the advice and consent. Effectively what that has morphed into is confirmation hearings over most of these candidates. So I expect that most of them will go through confirmations. Take somebody like Pete Hegseth, who's somewhat controversial. I have every confidence that he will be confirmed, but I have no doubt if there are full confirmation hearings that there will be some fireworks. I mean, when the Democrats get to ask questions, clearly there's going to be some really heated conversations.
It's going to be fun.
Yeah, I look forward to it.
I look forward to it.
One guy who can handle it, it's Pete Hegseth. I mean, he can handle it.
I think he'll rip off his shirt and talk about his tattoo. No, I do. I do look forward to. Do you think I'm going to ask this now, and then we're going to go through some more of these appointments. Do you think that there are going to be senators that are Republicans, and as we all know, there's only one reason that the Republicans have come out of this election so powerfully, and his name is Donald John Trump. So they owe everything to them. But I notice that loyalty and having a clear understanding of to whom you owe your allegiance and why, because they'd be nothing without the strength of Donald John Trump and all that he's done. Are they going to, as a whole, step in and support his agenda? And are there particular individuals that you think are going to have to be whipped into place? And is that, are we going to lose on this at all?
I don't think so. And that's why, though, it was so important to get to 53 and all the hard work that was done by all the patriots out there across the country, and of course by President Trump. And to give you one concrete example of that, remember, President Trump went and did a rally in Montana. That's not because President Trump was in trouble in Montana. It's not because he needed to shore up his support there. He went there and did that because he wanted now Senator-elect Sheehy to win his race. So Donald Trump did the work. A lot of great patriots out there did the work to make sure that we got not just a bare majority, not 50 or 51, but that we got to 53. And here's why that's so important, because to your point, Look, there are two senators. They both happen to be ladies. There are two senators who will probably bail on at least some of these appointments and some of the America First agenda. And they are Collins and Murkowski. We can't really count on them. They are Republicans, yes, but they are not America First conservatives. But luckily, because we're at 53, to be honest, they've been somewhat neutered. Their voting power isn't all that material because let's say they both vote against the nominee, bam, we're still at 51. And of course, we could even lose one more because in a 50-50 tie, J.D. Vance then breaks those
Steps in.
ties. Kamala Harris.
And who's he going to vote for? So, okay. Last question on this aspect of it, but will Collins and Murkowski face consequences if they don't do what I would say is their duty? But that's me. I'm just calling it their duty. I mean, everybody would say, but they have to be independent and blah, blah, blah. And I understand that as well. But I don't think that this is a matter of voting your conscience about abortion or restricting abortion. That's a real conscious thing. But why wouldn't a president, especially with the mandate that you well know he received, why wouldn't he be given the benefit of the doubt by Murkowski and Collins? I mean, of course, we know they're not there, but do they face any kind of consequence with it when it comes to the power within the Senate on the Republican side?
I believe so, and particularly in the case of Collins, who is up for re-election next cycle. So if she does become a problem, an obstacle for President Trump and for the America First agenda, I anticipate that she will be primaried. And Maine, by the way, is really kind of two different states. If you look at their two different congressional districts, of course, Donald Trump won the second district, which tends to be more rural and far more conservative. He lost the other one, which tends to be a little bit more like Boston or like Massachusetts. So the Republican Party, though, in terms of the Republican primary there, tends to be very conservative. So it is my hope that if she is the kind of thorn in his side that I think she's going to be, that she faces a primary challenge there. In the case of Murkowski, that name is unfortunately sort of political royalty in Alaska, and she has proven herself pretty resilient. So I don't know that there'd be consequences for her, but I think there would be for Collins. But hey, look, let's prepare for the worst, all right, and make sure we have our votes lined up, all 51 without those two. But let's also hope for the best and hope that they can see the light.
Absolutely. All I'll just say is I'll close with this. I will send money from Virginia to Maine to support whoever goes against Collins if that's a problem. Okay, let's go to Tulsi Gabbard. Mm-hmm. They've been attacking Tulsi, and I've actually been, for the first time in probably 20, 30 years, I've been watching CNN just the last couple of days. I've got to stop it because I didn't know how bad it was to the mind and the soul to watch that for longer than, a few minutes clips on X. So they have been actually saying Tulsi Gabbard wouldn't even be able to get a security clearance if she wasn't being appointed for this role.
What a shameful thing to say about somebody, who bravely wore our uniform, actually still wears our uniform in the reserve. She'll have to resign that, I think, now to take this new post. But look, incredible story. Somebody who is clearly a thinker, somebody who was a former Democrat who saw where her party was headed and said, I can't go there. Somebody who we won over, persuaded over to our side. And when it comes to matters of foreign policy and the intelligence services, I think she's absolutely the perfect pick, because we found out in Trump's first term, unfortunately, that the institutional class of the permanent administrative state in Washington, D.C., particularly when it comes to the intelligence community, was largely unwilling to bend to his authority, even though the people of the United States have selected him, have hired him essentially to be the overseer, to be the manager of that very intelligence community. Some of the people in that community believe that they can operate unaccountably. And that's simply not commensurate with a republic. It's not commensurate with the law, certainly not with tradition in this country. So I think we need somebody like Tulsi Gabbard who has the guts and the smarts to go in there and really shake up the intelligence community. So I think it's a fantastic pick. And again, if they want to cause a problem for somebody as good, as logical, and as good on TV as Tulsi Gabbard is, I think she's going to more than hold her own in terms of making the case of why she should be director of national intelligence.
Well, it's better to have someone of character and of strong moral principle, who would not concede or bend on truth and justice and the law, than to have someone who may have 10, 20, 30 years experience as a bureaucrat within these agencies, and then they step up, but they are amoral and will bend and weave to whatever liberal leftist agenda is the most popular, because they're essentially all leftist organizations. The majority of them are. I mean, I don't know what exceptions there are, but character is more important than any of it. So Tulsi Gabbard, and by the way, Fauci had 50 years of experience in his area. What did that do for the American people? The ethics and the morality of the person is much more important than the experience. By the way, they're also very experienced at playing the system. So John Ratcliffe, tell me more about that pick.
Yeah, listen,
I haven't heard a lot of people screaming about that, in other words.
right. Well, I guess, because he had already served as DNI and already been in the executive branch, obviously served in the Congress as well. You're right. He does not seem to, for whatever reason, be eliciting the kind of controversy that some of the other picks are. But again, I think, really skilled, really capable, has the experience in fighting against the bureaucracy, where I think he can be very helpful actually to Tulsi Gabbard at advising her, where are the pitfalls and where are the
That was my
potential fires.
question too.
Yeah. So I think
Mhm.
he's going to be very valuable, particularly in that regard, because we've got some folks who are more sort of fire breathers than he is, right? But perhaps he could give good advice off air, offline to the fire breathers
To
about,
Tulsi,
hey,
the fire breather.
yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
yes, she sure is.
Well, whenever I hear Ratcliffe speak, I really like him a lot. And I just wasn't sure if there was, if the reason why he was not being attacked is that he just seems more establishment from a surface level on the left. Like, he's been there a long time, and he's not a fire breather, like you said, like some other people. But you think he's good for the CIA director. Okay. Well, you weren't as excited about Mr. Rubio.
Yeah.
And so tell me a little bit about, well, why, but then if you've changed your mind, of course, we have to just wait and see and be hopeful
Right.
and
Right.
optimistic.
Yeah, let me first say, I think he's a wonderful senator for Florida. I think he does an incredible job advocating for that state. I mentioned previously about how ruby red Florida has become and how important that is for America. There's a lot of incredible leaders from the state of Florida, the foremost, of course, being President Trump himself. But regarding Rubio and foreign policy, this is where, he and I would diverge. He is a much more interventionist establishment Republican. He agrees a lot more with a Lindsey Graham than he would with a J.D. Vance. Or those of us on the more America First non-interventionist wing of the party, particularly, let me be specific, particularly as it pertains to Ukraine. I view Ukraine as a complete folly, as a regional ethnic war that is immaterial to the national interests of the United States. I don't think it's worthy of $1, much less hundreds of billions of dollars, to prop up a corrupt regime. There are corrupt regimes on both sides of that war. I do not believe that this is a black and white, good guys versus bad guys fight. I just do not. I think that's naive. I also don't believe that it's winnable for Ukraine. And so I think, unfortunately, what we are doing is effectively funding this slaughter of young Ukrainian men and young Russian men, when this could have been negotiated and should have been negotiated.
It could have been prevented. It could have been prevented. It never actually, even the invasion, there was forewarning. It was on the table. Putin comes in and says, look, do not bring Ukraine into NATO. Will you promise me that? Kamala Harris, Biden, the European, NATO. No, we won't promise you that. Right. Are you kidding me? And the long history, which we can't go into now, but when this first occurred, I was so distraught for Ukraine, which I am because of the number of deaths. Their male population has just been practically wiped out, from what I understand, and so many refugees, millions around the world. But I will say this, that I just was completely on the side of Ukraine, and I couldn't even imagine that there was another side to the story. And once I did, and it was really Bobby Kennedy or RFK Jr., when I first heard him speak about that literally changed everything. And I started to research, and I realized, there is so much more to this, and only the establishment regime media could have pulled off this one-sided understanding the American people have. That alone has divided us. And that is such a shame. And I think we need to all be on the same page, not saying that Ukraine is this evil place in Russia. There are good people that live there. They're not their leaders, but we certainly shouldn't all be at each other's throats, because I don't believe we should be in Ukraine anymore. I'm not pro Putin because of that. So you think that, what do you think Marco Rubio would have done or advised back when Russia was on the border of Ukraine and Kamala Harris was saying, flipping off Putin and saying, just go ahead, try it, let's go to war? What do you think Marco Rubio would have?
He's been very pro NATO expansion all along. I know that, and he did vote against the latest tranche of Ukraine aid. But prior to that, he voted in favor of all of this mountain of money that the United States has borrowed. By the way, we don't have the money. Okay, we're borrowing the money to then send it over
At
to
great
Zelensky
cost.
and Ukraine. And Marco Rubio voted for all of those. So that troubles me greatly. Now, listen. Hope springs eternal, Elizabeth. Okay,
I like your hopeful attitude. I really appreciate that, Steve.
Sure. No, listen, he knows he's working for President Trump. He knows he is not the key architect of American foreign policy. The commander-in-chief is. And so I believe that he will respectfully promote the agenda of President Trump, which will undoubtedly include achieving a quick peace in the Black Sea region. So don't get me wrong. I don't want to be too negative. He would not have been my selection. I would have liked somebody who's much more non-interventionist than Marco Rubio. But having said that, I'd love to be proven wrong. I'd love for him to be a really effective spokesman for the country. As a Hispanic conservative, of course, I love seeing Hispanic Americans get into big positions of power and authority like that. I think that's useful for our movement. And of course, our electoral gains among Hispanics were unbelievable. So it won't hurt to have a guy named Marco Rubio in one of the foremost positions of American government, to be the successor to Thomas Jefferson. I mean, this is big stuff, right? This is really consequential. So
that's a good point.
But wish him the best.
And I do too. And I think also what we can say is this, that non-interventionism, and I'm right there with you, Steve, but we have to remember that to be the leader of the free world, we don't want to be the police. We don't want to, no more forever wars. We should never have had, Ukraine should never have happened. So I'm completely with you on that, but we don't ever want to lose we don't want to be weak. And that's what we have been living during all the Obama administration, even though he was out there doing crazy things. But all through the Biden administration, we have looked weak, and that is more dangerous than anything. So there's peace through strength. I think that's, I hope that, and by the way, we know J.D. Vance and some of the biggest supporters. I heard RFK the other day in a talk he was giving, talking about how he considers Donald Trump, this is a paraphrase, to be of such high moral fiber or ethics, integrity was, I think, the word he used. This is a guy, I'm reading one of his books right now, and I love him so much. It's about the real Fauci. And this was written a few years ago. He did not use the word integrity and associated with Donald Trump at that point. So there's a journey, right? And maybe Mr. Rubio or Senator Rubio has taken that journey as well. Let's talk about Kristi Noem.
Yeah, listen, I think will be terrific. Showed her skill as a governor, which is fantastic training to run a big agency, because of course a governor is basically a CEO of a state operation, a state government election or a government apparatus. And so I think, given that kind of background, is very, very well positioned. And of course, look, we know that Homeland Security has been as poorly run as any agency of the United States federal government for the last 4 years. I mean, Mayorkas was impeached and should have been tried and should have been, in fact, convicted. That's how awful the leadership or lack of leadership of Homeland Security has been. So let's hope and be confident in and pray for a really, really different approach, hopefully working in conjunction with Tom Homan, who I just have all the respect and confidence in.
Now, does Tom, Tom, he's a machine. He's a beast. Yeah. But I bet you he's the sweetest, most tender-hearted guy. But a guy who is all business just because he's tough, and it's legitimate tough. It's authentic. But he's probably a teddy bear at home. with his wife. You know what
Right.
I mean?
Right.
He's
Sure.
probably got this great. It's like Donald Trump. Trump is this tough guy and saying all these very tough things sometimes, but he's got a heart as tender as, I don't know, just a
Yeah.
tender-hearted man. So Kristi Noem, does she have what it takes to go into that position and really make those tough decisions? And does Tom Homan, he won't be actually directly answering to her, or will he?
It appears not, no, that he will be sort of a White House czar over broadly over border and immigration issues. So probably working with a lot of different departments, but largely, of course, with Homeland Security. At least that's what we know right now as far as how they're going to organizationally structure things. So no, I think that particularly in combination with and in working with Tom Homan, that they're just going to be, she's going to be successful. The country's going to be successful. I'll tell you a quick, fun Tom Homan story. The first time I met him, I was actually working at CNN at the time. Believe it or not, I was the lone. I was sort of what Scott Jennings does now. I was the lone conservative over there. Yes, back in this was 2017, and we talked tons of immigration issues, of course, because they were hair on fire every night trying to call the president a racist just because President Trump believes in border security. So we fought immigration constantly. And in any case, Tom Homan reached out to me because he thought I was very effective at communicating on this issue and defending his agency. He was then the head of ICE. And so he asked me to come in and chat with him and be briefed and thank me and all that sort of thing. And a wonderful guy, met a lot of fantastic people at ICE, brave people who do really dangerous work to protect our country. And anyway, when we sat down at his very impressive office at ICE headquarters, great view of the mall, when we sat down, I could see his ankle a little bit, and he had a Glock on his ankle. And I thought, this is fantastic because here he is. He's the head of the agency. You wouldn't expect him to necessarily even have a sidearm on him. But he came up through the ranks. I mean, he's a cop. He came up through the Customs Immigration and through ICE. And because of that, he still has that mentality. And I thought that was pretty neat that
I
here we
think
have a
it's
guy who's
very important
raised to the
because
cabinet level.
that's like the guy who starts down in the mailroom and works his way up, but it's even more important than that because if you haven't been out there on the front lines, like a Pete Hegseth, and know what it feels like, Pete brings to this, here's a man, a patriot and a brilliant man, and who has been in combat, and then he has been betrayed by leadership within the Department of Defense. I remember that he was supposed to be part of the, military presence during the Biden administration or the inauguration. And they called him and said, no, you don't need to be there because he was a traitor or national security threat, something like that. And so a man who's been attacked like that unjustly is just kind of the man, just the kind of man who needs to be in that position in order to overturn that kind of thinking and that injustice. And I think having Tom Homan, who's lived through the kind of problems that an ICE agent would have to deal with every day. He understands their heart and their minds and the work
Right.
and the sacrifice. So, Elise Stefanik has gotten, to me, a little less coverage than a lot of the other nominees. I wonder why that is. She's going to be hot at the UN. I am like, when I put her, if I take her and lift her out about her questioning about, Harvard, MIT, and Penn State or whatever it was, those deans and presidents, and just stick her right into the UN and say, open your mouth and just go, Elise. Just do your thing.
Right.
She was a
Look,
surprise person to me. I had no idea who she was
yeah.
before that.
Well, look, we know that the United Nations, unfortunately, is largely a den of vipers, right? I mean, that's just the reality. And so we need a really strong person, a really smart, really strong person to represent American interests there up in New York City. And I think she's the exact right person to do so. She has the intelligence, the vigor, the fierceness. And again, you're exactly correct. She showed that, I think, best of all. Well, I think there were two different times. When she was defending President Trump during both fake impeachments, she was really magnificent. think that's when she introduced herself to a lot of us on the right, or folks who may not follow politics super closely. But then again, when these universities acted so despicably, when they were so anti-America, anti-Israel, anti-free speech, she really exposed who they were. And it's pretty significant. I mean, you take down Ivy League presidents, that's a big deal, and to do so just through questioning, through asking very valid
I
questions of them.
think I think Claudine Gay would still be at Harvard if it were not for Elise Stefanik.
Right,
That's just my
right.
opinion. But that's the kind of person you need, especially with the cesspool that the UN is. Do you think we should
Yeah.
even be in the UN? I was thinking that we should be talking to Israel and have a co-departure from the United Nations, because you wouldn't want one to leave without the other, because the U.S. has to be there to protect Israel from the vultures in the UN. Just give me your side thoughts on the UN.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, I'll tell you this, at the least, I would sure prefer it to not be physically in the United States. Like, can we move that over to Switzerland or somewhere, please? I mean, that would be at least a start, right? And then consider perhaps leaving. Yeah, look, does the UN do good work? There might be a tiny sliver of good work, but in general, no. It is
When you
nothing but
find that
corruption.
sliver, just let me know,
Right.
because I have
Yeah,
not found it in all the
I
years
hear
I've
you.
been researching it. So this is another one. Mike Waltz, National Security Advisor. Um, I haven't heard a lot of resistance, because there's other people that are just taking all the oxygen out of the room. Tell me about Mike Waltz.
Sure.
What do you
I
think?
would put him in the same category as Marco Rubio largely. Again, I think he's a superb congressman, also from Florida, represents his district super well, but he's clearly much more interventionist than most of us on the populist wing of the America First movement. I think he and Marco Rubio are almost in lockstep when it comes to foreign policy, particularly as it pertains to Ukraine. Now, but let me also say this, in fairness to President Trump, what he may very well be doing here is very purposefully constructing a bit of a team of rivals, right? And that phrase got to be very famous about Abraham Lincoln, who did this very intentionally, right? Wanted aides who disagreed with each other and effectively litigated in front of him. And then, of course, he is sort of the judge, makes the final call, delivers the verdict. So in this regard, perhaps when it comes to a place like Ukraine, he has J.D. Vance, who is about as harshly against American intervention in Ukraine as anyone in Washington, D.C., right? As a senator, I think he was the foremost voice for de-escalation of American involvement in Ukraine, probably the foremost voice. He has him as his vice president, as literally his number two. And then on the other hand, when it comes to Ukraine specifically, he's going to have Waltz and Rubio. And perhaps he's constructing it that way on purpose, and he's going to hear from both sides. And hey, one thing I will tell you is, let's just say Marco Rubio is giving interventionist advice and counsel to the president. Marco Rubio is also going to be on a plane most of his life. That's what secretaries of state do, while J.D. Vance will be in the Oval Office. So I'm very comfortable as somebody who
The
wants to
balance
de-escalate.
there. And I love
Yeah.
the idea of the team of rivals.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
That's
so
very, very
that could
wise.
very well be what's going on there.
Because they're
And
not
listen,
opposites. They
right.
wouldn't be unfriendly rivals. People can disagree about something like Ukraine.
Yeah, and we'll agree on a lot more, of course, right? We'll agree on the border. We'll agree on Israel. We'll agree on China, right? And by the way, I think China is, the most important threat of all, of course, in the world. And all those people I just mentioned, all of them are unanimously in agreement on the China threat, right? Which unfortunately has really has gone unattended to with Biden and Harris in the White House. So a lot of work to be done there, of course. Hard work. And I think, again, they'd all be on the same page on those issues. So yes, agreed. We'll agree on most foundational issues. But I'm just, Elizabeth, I'm going to be honest with you. When I see these folks go up for confirmation and nomination, and then hopefully confirmation, if I have qualms. So
Well, absolutely. And I also think that one thing we do know, I don't think I've heard one person on the America First non-interventionist MAGA side of the aisle, which is where I am, say that Waltz or Rubio would be in any way, shape, or form. I'm actually affirming this. I don't want my words to be thought of out of context. Marco Rubio would no more go against President Trump's wishes. He may disagree, but he is not going to be disloyal. That would
right.
be unthinkable. And I think that what Trump is doing is putting together a team that, while there may be some differences, they're going to be, this is like an adventure. This is an era. This is the Trump era. This is the golden age, and I think we're all so happy. We wake up every morning with a little extra lift in our step, and I just can't imagine anybody wanting to do what anything that would undermine that. Vivek Ramaswamy, what do we have to say about him and Elon Musk? Nothing. They're perfect.
Yeah. No, listen, fantastic. So exciting. The idea of these people who have been so incredibly successful in business. In the case of Elon Musk, perhaps the most successful businessman ever. I don't think it's an exaggeration to at least make that claim for him, but to have him in charge of truly reforming government, something that's been talked about a lot, but where there hasn't been much action, let's face it, even when Republicans have had control of Congress or they've had control of the
No.
White House.
Reinventing government and all
Yeah,
these things all the years. There's never been a reinvention of government since we went to the bureaucratic state.
right.
There's,
And so
there's,
it's incredibly exciting. If it can be done, I really believe it's Elon Musk who can do it. And part of why I say that is what he did at Twitter. Now, I understand the government is far bigger and far more complicated than Twitter, but nevertheless, he stepped into, a sophisticated organization that was incredibly antagonistic to him at first, that was very bureaucratic, that was absolutely antithetical to free speech in this country. And he transformed almost immediately. I mean, it only took him weeks to completely transform that place, to fire the villains within there, to lift up the folks who were trying to do good work, to change the procedures, to change the culture. So if he can do it there, I do believe, again, I know the government's way bigger, way more complicated than Twitter, but still, it tells me that he can do it. Also, just his record of being a problem solver in all of his various businesses. Look, anyone who saw that rocket take off and then literally press the reverse button and come right back into the silo. I mean, it was the most incredible display of scientific achievement, right? Of logistics and engineering. I mean, holy cow. If he can lead that effort to do that with that rocket, I believe that he can finally reform the Leviathan that is the administrative state of Washington, D.C.
oh, I truly believe it's doable. And I think with Vivek as his partner, that they both bring to the table the same spirit, but they support each other in their gifts.
Right.
And this is like, I would rather live through this next year than practically any year in the history of the United States. Mike Huckabee, I was just talking to Josh Hammer yesterday, and he thinks it's going to be one of the best nominations for an ambassador to Israel. I had done an interview with Ambassador David Friedman, and he accomplished so much for the Trump administration, but Mike Huckabee is going to be quite an advocate. So what do you think
Yeah,
about him?
absolutely. Yeah, magnificent pick. What an amazing family, by the way. His daughter is just an incredible governor, doing great work now, and I think perhaps some bright things in the future for her at the national level. We'll see. But regardless, she's doing a wonderful job of managing her home state. In terms of Mike Huckabee, he's incredibly pro-Israel. He knows as much about Israel as any person in the United States. So both his heart and his mind are prepared for this. But in addition, and again, this is key, I mentioned this with Pete Hegseth, having the kind of communications and TV skills that he has is really, really valuable, because not only is he going to be America's representative to Israel, but he's also going to be a voice for Israel back in the United States, and an incredibly effective one, because he's so good at communications, so good at TV, and is going to bring all those skills to this task. So I think he's the absolutely perfect selection.
I do too. I think you're right to bring it back to communication skills, because beside really understanding Israel and, just the problems that they face, they need some PR help in Israel, because they're losing the PR war to a certain extent. But I think that could be changed on a dime, because we should be supporting Israel. They are our allies, and we should be standing 100% with them. So the difference between what reality and what truth is, and what the American people, unfortunately the younger generation, are hearing, is just a dramatic cacophony of difference. And so I think he would be great in the first step to helping work that back. Also, David was a Jewish man. And I think it'll be refreshing to have somebody as strong as Friedman, but as a Christian, because he comes at it. And I think Christians that aren't on side properly with Israel as they should be, I think having him speak, he's a committed Christian. Let's just say
Right.
this. And I think that
Sure.
that's going to be very important. Steve Miller. Steve
Yeah.
Miller.
Listen, fantastic. So glad that he's going to be back in the White House. Not surprised, of course, that he will be. Uh, he's one of the smartest people I think, in the entire political and policy arena of the United States. I'm not exaggerating when I say that. And then particularly, of course, as it pertains to border and immigration issues. And, to me, there are many failures, of course, of the Biden-Harris administration, but to me, the two biggest, most unfortunate failures were on immigration and on inflation. It was economy and border. Those were the two macro failures that both need to be attacked and rectified and fixed as quickly as possible under this new leadership. And mostly on that immigration and border side is where Stephen Miller is just invaluable. And I think he'll be a much needed, very refreshing policy framework change and driver of change in the White House. So very excited that he's going back in, and he certainly has more than earned it.
Bold, bold, and that is what I love. And I noticed that everybody else as deputy chief of staff did not have sort of the comma policy, next to it, and I wasn't sure what that means. Is he going to be in charge of all policy as the chief of staff, or
Yeah.
yeah?
That's the way I took it. I don't know for certain,
You're
but
not
that is the
sure
way I
either.
took it. That perhaps he's sort of first among equals. That they're
Yeah.
all the same rank, but it seems like he's a slight notch above in terms of authority and scope. Yes.
Well, so we've pretty much gone through. There's some I didn't go through everybody with you, and because I did some yesterday with somebody else. What do you think? The first day, the first 100 days, what are we looking at as far as the Trump team is concerned? Inauguration. What happens? Is Trump going to be doing? I was there at the inauguration. You were too in 2016 or 2017. So did he go straight back to the Oval and just start ripping through? Sorry,
I think
ripping
so.
through EOs.
Yeah, I think so. Executive orders immediately, and by the way, I think they'll mostly pertain to those two areas that I just mentioned of the border and inflation. And so,
Wait a
what
minute,
can he
drill,
do?
baby, drill.
Exactly. I was going to say, what can he do right away? Pipelines, drilling, absolutely. And a lot of that can be done by executive order. He does not need to go through Congress.